Thanks for joining us for the Michigan State University Beekeeping Office Hours, June 2025 edition. We'll start with introductions. We'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the hives right now, and then we'll take the whole rest of your time answering your questions. And so make sure that you put them in the chat. All right, and Zachary's joining us too. Zachary, your timing is perfect. We're just going to start with introductions. So I'll start. I'm Megan Milbrath. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology and in the Large Animal Clinical Sciences at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Michigan State. And I also keep bees down in Jackson County. Zachary, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. You can hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Zachary Huang. I'm an associate professor at Michigan State University. I study honeybees.
Excellent. Anna, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Anna Heck. I'm an apiculture extension educator, and I also keep bees with Dan. And I am on leave right now, but I'm happy to be here for the webinar. But because I'm on leave, I did not go into a hive in the last month. So um, I'll answer some questions, but not specifically about what I saw in hives last week.
We're very happy to have you. And Dan?
Yeah, Dan Wines. I am the farm manager at the Pollinator Center on campus at MSU. That means I look after all of the colonies that we use for research, teaching, and extension purposes. And also, Anna and I have our own beekeeping operation. We run colonies in Ingham County and Clinton County um, we produce some nukes and honey production. So that's kind of the perspective I speak from when I tell you what I've seen in bees in the last month, I suppose.
And there is a question in the chat or the Q&A that says, I missed last month's office hours. Are you going to post them? Yes, that is because Anna was on leave and I fell apart without her. And so I just recorded it and it's still on my laptop. So we will post those and we're recording this one tonight. Yes, right. I don't see a thing. And so we'll make sure that you see those. Before we get too deep, I am going to post the June resources for beekeepers in the chat. So there is a link there that has lots of different resources that are kind of timely for things that people should be doing this time of year. So I guess before we get too deep, we can talk about things that are being done to bees on campus. Maybe Zachary, do you want to give an update of things? Are you in the US right now?
I'm in my backyard right now.
Okay, I never know. Do you want to talk maybe about some of the big things that are blooming and things you've seen bees on?
Yeah, the biggest thing, of course, when you're driving on 96, you see all the white flowers. It's so beautiful. So those are black locusts. And for some reason, they did not really bloom last year. So this year, I think it's a great year for bees. I saw so many trees loaded with flowers. There's more flowers than leaves right now.
Mm-hmm.
I heard bees would only work on the flowers when near the end. So when the flowers almost withering, drop almost petal falling, and the bees work on it. So that's what I heard. And well, that was actually true when I tried to take pictures. If I went there too early, no bees. So the bees would only show up when it's past the peak bloom, and bees will come. But it should be a good year for honeybees to get some honey. And then right after that, basswood is just forming the flower buds, which would be maybe 2 or 3 weeks away. And Russian olive was done a week ago, was before this, and I think what others were blooming. Was a big one Dan mentioned, and others were mentioning. that was also blooming right now, but I forgot. All the fruit trees are basically done. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had pears done like 3 weeks ago. So unless you're up in north, like in southern Bay Area, you might still have cherry blooming. But in South Michigan, it's pretty much done. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, definitely for where we are, the black locust blooms. So for those of you north, it's coming. Hopefully we have a good year, the whole state.
So
Um,
by the way, that photo on the front page, that's the black locust.
how timely. So, and before we get into what we've done for beekeeping, I'm going to start our demographic poll so it helps us know who we're serving. This is the resources. I'll leave this up for 1 second, but this is the same link that's in the chat. But if you want to hit it off the QR code on your phone instead. And then if you have questions at any time after this chat, we will always answer questions through our online Ask Extension portal. And so you can put them there, which is at pollinators.msu.edu. And then now we'll have maybe Dan, if you want to talk about what we've been doing to the honeybees on campus, and then we'll dive into your questions.
Sure. So yeah, this last month, I mean, I always think of May as like peak busy beekeeping season. Just trying to stay in front of the bees and work around the weather. So we did splits that are, pretty much done with making up new units now. We made splits from late April through about mid-May. Those ones, we did a variety. We had some mated queens, and also we did a number of walkaways, um, where you just take, essentially take resources for the colony, including eggs, so that they can make their own queen. And with the timing of that, I like to check back at about 5 weeks, which I'm just coming up on. So that's on my to-do list for this week of, it takes 2 weeks for a queen to be raised and emerge, and then another couple weeks for her to get out, mate, get laying, and get going. So I like to check those 4.5, 5 weeks. And so that's been a big undertaking on stuff that has been queen right, either stuff that we took splits out of, but we left overwintered queens, or colonies that we put queens in, things that are queen right. We've been doing, swarm control. So that's pretty frequently checking to make sure they've got adequate space, getting supers on, in some cases adding an extra brood chamber. And just really making sure, as Zachary mentioned, some of the nectar plants, things that are coming in. We had a decent flow from autumn olive a couple weeks ago, mid-May there. And it's starting to see like the blackberries going now, starting to see clover and things like that in the pasture. And then obviously, like you said, the black locust, if you look around, you can't miss it. And on this day like today, yesterday, tomorrow, certainly if it's warm where we are in that part of the state, the nectar is absolutely pouring in. So really making sure our bees have space to put that so they're not getting congested. And then looking a little bit forward, starting to think about getting mite treatments on. So starting to look at temperature windows, and we'll be using a couple different products this summer for different yards and different projects, but that's kind of where we've been the last month, and where, what's in the near future for us.
Such a fun time of year. I mean, mine's basically the same, putting on boxes, and then I went out last week and did mite treatments on all of my hives. It's a little earlier than I tend to do it, but I had a long weekend, and then that's what the time that I was able to get out there and do it. What I used for Varroa, so anything that was queen right and large got the Mite Away, no, Formic Pro. And then anything that was small or in the process of requeening got Viroxan. And that was kind of nice for me to have both of them on hand, because then it felt like for the stuff that was a little sensitive, I didn't have to put anything too dramatic in. And then this weekend, I'm going to go back out. I did have a lot that were in the middle of requeening because that was just the timing of when I could do splits and when, right now there are a lot of things that if you haven't split them and they didn't have a young queen, there's a lot of super procedures going on. And so that's kind of a normal thing if you're not really good about putting young queens in every year. It's pretty expected to see them. So I was happy that I had that. And then I'm going to go out again and check this coming weekend. So it'll be 2 weeks after, pull out the Formic Pro pads and put Viroxan in those, and then check everything else that's requeening. So in my mind, the things that got Viroxan and a brood break are kind of getting 2 treatments, and then everything else is going to get Formic and the Viroxan. So, and then I'll bring a lot of supers out with me too. So, all right. So I'll just start diving into some of the questions. The first one is what are the trees blooming with the white clusters that look like wisteria? And that is the black locust that we've all been talking about. All right. The first question, it says, how do I get treatment for EFB? I'll start with that one because EFB is my one true love right now. But this is the time that we are seeing it. I've definitely seen signs. So EFB is short for European fall brood. There are a few things you can do with a colony that you see EFB. There's no one standard recommendation. It's not a reportable disease. There is an antibiotic that works and it is still effective, and we have not seen signs of resistance, and that's oxytetracycline. And that is labeled for the control of EFB. So if you want to look for managing it within a hive, but also controlling the spread between hives in your operation, you can get oxytetracycline. You do have to work with a licensed veterinarian. And we do maintain a website with a list of veterinarians in the state of Michigan who are willing to work with beekeepers. Or you can ask your veterinarian if you have one, like for your dog or cat or horse or goats or whatever. And if you ask them if they want to work with bees, if they're a little uncertain about it, you can give them our contact info. I'd be happy to help them to make sure that they know how and where to do it and to get that their license is protected. And so I can make sure that the list of our vets go in the chat. So if you want to use oxytetracycline, that is available. You just have to make sure that you're reading the label very carefully so that you're not, putting it on when honey supers are on, and you're being really careful about the withdrawal. You can also do watchful waiting. If it's a very, very mild infection, it does tend to clear up in a lot of cases. But if it is a severe infection, you would want to do something serious. And then if you are in a place where reinfection is unlikely, like you're not perpetually buying nukes or you're in a really remote location, you can do a little more dramatic activity, which would be like to do what's called a shook swarm, where you can take the bees and shake them onto new equipment. One thing to keep in mind, though, is with European fall brood, there are very high rates of asymptomatic infection. So if you just do the hives with the signs of disease, there are likely going to be bees that have the bacteria in your other colonies as well. So you may be playing kind of like a game of whack-a-mole as it shows up in other hives. So I notice Anna is putting links in the chat too, so you can see the European fall brood webinar we do. We try to do updates every year of where we are with research, and then also the contact list for veterinarians. There's a question that says, I am a nuke provider. I received a picture from the hives that probably they sold it to. Lots of dead bees with tongues out. I'm assuming pesticides. What can be done? I don't know what to tell them. Anna, do you want to talk a bit about what people should do if they suspect a colony is injured from pesticides?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat with some resources. So, the first thing is bees get sick and they die from lots of different things, right? So we don't always know if it's pesticides, but sometimes you don't know unless there's an investigation. So if you suspect that you have a bee kill due to pesticides, you can reach out to the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. and you can request an investigation. We have at MSU been working pretty closely with a couple of inspectors there who really want to, make sure that beekeepers are getting those inspections when, if there's a suspected pesticide kill. So the first step would be to reach out to them. Ideally, you want to do it right after you notice the suspected pesticide kill. If time passes, then those pesticides can break down. And so it can be really hard for the investigation to, determine if pesticides were likely the cause of those bees dying. And sometimes if time has passed since the incident, inspectors won't even want to go out because there's not much that they could find if time has passed. So normally we suggest, the day of or within a couple, the day of that you reach out to Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. You might want to gather some evidence by taking some pictures and videos, but you don't want to do too much manipulation in the hives because that might be, you don't want to get in the way of their investigation. And then they can come out, take samples, they can send them to labs. There's also options if you don't want to go through our Department of Ag that you can take your own samples. You can send them to labs for analysis, and I'll throw a link in the chat for some labs. And then you can also report a suspected bee kill directly to the EPA, even if time has passed and even if you've taken your own samples. They, I think, give a little bit more weight to bee kills that were investigated by the Department of Agriculture because there's the chain of custody, but they're also listening to beekeepers when they report suspected bee kills.
And there's actually a second issue in the chat, which I think everything that you said is relevant to this, but just there was another scenario where someone received their first nuke last Saturday. Everything was good until this Saturday. In the morning, everything was good, but by 5 p.m., they were flying out of the hive and falling to the ground and dying. So sad. All the dead bees had their tongues out. They think that it was pesticides. It's in two parts. I'm going to try to find the second part. Any suggestions how to help the survivors? I guess that part we could add to it. And then they think maybe it had to do with a corn planting where the wind was blowing in the direction. So I don't know, Anna, if you wanted to keep going on what you should do for the surviving colony too.
I mean, you want to just, I think, try to keep it as healthy as you can. Maybe feeding it would help, especially if it lost a lot of its foragers. Making sure that the mite levels are low, especially because you don't know if viruses were an interacting factor or part of the cause of those losses. But, just kind of keep them as healthy as you can. Check on them, make sure they're queen right, feed them. And then another thing I was just going to add in terms of reporting is Megan and I do have conversations with people from our Department of Ag and from EPA who sometimes don't realize that honeybee colonies are dying because of pesticide exposure because they don't get reported. And so that's just we know it takes time and work to report these kinds of pesticide kills. And it's not always convenient for the beekeeper, but it can help the overall beekeeping community because sometimes if we're able to actually identify which pesticide was the cause, and that can help determine how pesticides are used in the future.
Yes, exactly. All right. Dan, here's one for you. And I think it says, I inspected a hive today. I found one frame with about 15 or more drone cells. Should I get rid of them? I think you can answer the question directly and then maybe also talk about the concept of drone brood removal for IPM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so removing drones is beekeeper preference. I typically only focus on it if it's a situation where they've made like a kind of what I consider to be a mess of the comb, where they haven't stayed in their nice parallel sheets in the frames we like, and they've made cross comb between frames, or it's getting really thick on the bottom bars, and it becomes, I don't want to damage bees, roll a queen, something like that when I'm trying to get things out. So I will sometimes scrape drone brood out if it's in an area where it's kind of a hindrance to me handling that colony gently and minimizing the intrusion to the bees. So that's one aspect. 15 cells, not a lot. Totally fine to leave them. But as Megan mentioned, there is a method of drone brood removal, which can kind of be part of an IPM strategy for managing mites. And Varroa mites preferentially reproduce in drone brood, and because the drone is under the capping for a few extra days, and the way like the timing of the Varroa mite founders laying eggs for they get more offspring out of when they're in with a developing drone cell than they do with a worker. So removing drone brood from the colony can be a tool that helps beekeepers keep on top of their mite population. So beekeepers do that deliberately by you can actually add. There's manufactured frames. They're the ones I've seen are all like a bright green plastic. And as our like normal worker foundation has its size, it had this drone foundation is a bigger diameter, encourages your bees to lay drones there, and then you have to monitor it pretty closely. But if you are correct on your timing, you can pull that frame out when those drone cells are capped, feed it to your chickens, put it in the freezer, whatever it is. But it kind of acts as a sink for the mites to go to, and then you're removing it. Some people use if you have deep equipment, you can put a medium frame in a deep box, and oftentimes the bees will then put a stripe of drone brood in that space underneath, and you can go in and just cut it off with your hive tool. But again, you want to be if that's something you're going to do, drone brood removal. The timing is critical because if you leave it too long, you've just all of a sudden, and those drones have emerged and the mites with them, all of a sudden you've really increased the population if you kind of forget that step to go and pull them out of there. So
Yeah, good answer. I don't know, Zachary, are you still with us?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. I have a question. Are you ready for a question?
sure.
So someone said, can I take honey supers off of different hives and put them onto a single stack and put a bee escape on top to clear the bees out overnight, or will all the bees fight in this scenario?
Put into a different
I think they want to
uh,
take the honey supers off of multiple hives and put all the
uh,
honey supers on a single hive. My guess is they only have one queen escape or bee escape, I
okay.
mean.
Yeah. It's I think right now during a big honey flow, I doubt that there will be much fighting, but I don't know if it's a good thing to do. One is to possibility of transmitting disease, and of course, the possibility of fighting between bees. Uh, I would just brush them. If you only have a few hives, just brush them one by one would work. Take some time. I would do it that way if I have less than 5 hives. Yeah. And another issue is beetles. So if you leave them overnight, if you have 5 supers stacked on one hive, it might take more than a day. And then the concern would be small hive beetles sneak in because there's very few bees inside to defend the honey and the hives. So that's another concern. So I would not do that. If one box is probably okay, but I'm not going to do 4 or 5 boxes to another hive.
Thanks. So there is a question that says, why are Veraxian strips not recommended for use during a honey flow, even though it's allowed to be used with honey boxes on? So the reason, Michelle, I waited a second to check your answers because I was looking up the label to confirm, but my understanding and the label that I have access to does not say that there's anything about not using Viroxan during a honey flow, and I'm watching Anna's face to see if she agrees. And yeah, okay. So there isn't anything on the EPA label that I have, but if you want to follow up with a link, the one that I know that there are some that you can't use with the honey flow. The new one, the new label for the Noroa, the double-stranded RNA that just got approved this week, That one you can't use with a honey flow on, and the concern with that is that it would just get too diluted. And then there's other ones, of course, that you can't use with the honey flow, like Amatraz and Apiguard and things like that, because they would get into the honey. But the current Viroxan label, my understanding is it is used when a honey flow is on. Dan, all right. I have a hive that tried to requeen with a virgin queen that did not make it back from a mating flight. Because the hive was hopelessly queenless prior to introduction of the virgin, the hive now appears to have laying workers. Is there anything that can be done at this point to save this hive?
Not really. I mean, functionally, once you get to the point of a laying worker, that hive is kind of genetically dead. I don't have a lot of experience I don't have any experience deliberately introducing virgins into hives. But that's, I guess, not really the question here. It's dealing with laying workers. Um, so that hive as a living organism is kind of functionally dead, but that doesn't mean those bees don't have some value, and you can essentially combine that colony with another queen-right colony. You can do a newspaper combine. So we've talked about that before. We have to talk about that in late season when you're merging two weaker colonies together. A couple of sheets of newspaper in between, and then you're putting, the queenless half on the queen-right half. And if you kind of scratch a couple small holes in the newspaper, and what that does is it slows the introduction. They don't all meet at once and fight with each other. It's over the course of a day or two, they chew out the newspaper, and that laying worker hive, the bees from that will integrate in. So that's typically how I deal with them. If I have a laying worker, I just kind of newspaper it onto something else, and seems to go fine. So, but I don't. As far as saving it, I've never had any real success trying to introduce a mated queen, into that hive. It's been queenless long enough to get to a laying worker. They don't have a lot of young bees. They don't have any brood. They're really depleted in resources, and they've got some middle-aged and old bees. So those bees and the comb can be valuable integrated into another colony.
Excellent. All right, Anna. My bees came up about a month ago and seem to be doing well. I'm up north on the beautiful Leelanau Peninsula. When should I think about starting Varroa treatment, and which one should I use?
Good question. Like almost all of our answers, the answer is it depends. But some things that you're thinking about are colony size, temperature, and if you have honey supers on. So all of those kind of factors will determine which treatments you can use. So for our smaller colonies, you might think of something like a Viroxan treatment, which is the newer oxalic acid treatment. You could also do like a HopGuard treatment, and both of those you can use with honey supers on. And then for colonies that are a little bit larger in population and have more brood, we sometimes use the formic acid treatment, but that's a treatment that you can't use on smaller colonies, but formic acid you can also use with honey supers on. So normally with the smaller colonies, I'm kind of leaning towards an oxalic acid or a HopGuard treatment. And then with larger colonies, the formic acid or sometimes even the newer Viroxan treatment should be good as well. And there's other treatments out there too. We're kind of saying some of the ones that are known to have less or are not known to have resistance. There's some other treatments that are out there too that have resistance documented or that aren't good that can't be used with honey supers on. And I'll put in the link in the chat too. We have the Tools for Varroa management guide from the Honeybee Health Coalition, and then we also have like a little supplemental article for the newer treatments, and the Honeybee Health Coalition's guide is getting updated right now, so hopefully soon you'll be able to see the updated guide.
All right, so there's a question about requeening right now, and it said we did a split on May 5th, and today we're June 2. Walkaway split into a 5-frame nuke. We checked the hives on the 31st and did not see eggs or larvae yet in either of the hives, so assume we lost the queen in the transfer. Is it too soon to requeen the hives? Should we wait another week or so? So if Dan and I actually had this discussion about doing the math, and especially, I think, Chris, did you answer? Yes. And there is a question below, which I think you may be actually getting to your own answer, where it says, do recent cold temperatures delay mating flights? So, in my opinion, I think you just looked too soon. And either the colonies are fine or they're not fine. And sometimes when you open up when they're in the process of requeening, you just can't tell. And if you try to stick another queen in there, you're going to mess everything up and waste your money and waste your time. And so my recommendation is just to wait a week or two, um, and to check again. So when it takes 16 days total for a queen to emerge from an egg. But when you do a walkaway split, they start with someone a little older. And so that's going to be basically 2 weeks till she emerges. And then she has basically a full 2 weeks. She has a 1 week before she's even interested in going out and getting mated. And then has, a 2 week window to go out and get mated. And as you alluded to, the colder temperatures will prolong that. So in best case scenario, it's a week, but she does have a while to do it. So we're not even really, we're kind of right at the 4 week mark or the 1 month mark right now. So my recommendation would just be to wait it out, and then, because then at least you'll know. So either they're queen right and she came back and that's fantastic, or it'll be lane worker, it'll be really obvious that they're not queen right, and then you can just do what Dan just talked about and do the recombining. All right. Dan, what do you expect your splits to look like this time of year for both walkaways and for adding a queen? So in other words, how many frames of bees would you expect to see? How much comb drawing if added foundation? Are you adding supers yet to splits?
Yeah, so that again, it totally depends. And it's I've made a variety of different splits for different purposes this spring. And so, like, we've made some splits and introduced queens where we wanted those to get up to be full, sort of mature colonies for a study, very like now. So we made those end of April, first week of May, and we made them with probably an average of 5 frames of brood, and they got a second box almost immediately, which was largely drawn comb. And so those are hard to differentiate from the overwintered colonies that have been taking from to for swarm control, and that in that they're 2 deeps full of bees, they're up into a super, and they're probably going to get a second super in the next week or so. I also, so usually if I'm investing in a queen to make a queen right split, I want that this early in the year. It's different if it's July, August, but in May, if I'm making a split with a queen, I want that to be a production unit for the year. Like I'm not making replacement stock at this time of year from a queen right split. Um, Whereas I made some walkaway splits, and that the purpose of those was to some degree to slow down the parent colonies that they came out of. And because I'm making a walkaway, I know there's not going to be a laying queen for about a month. When I make that walkaway, there's not going to be any emerging bees from that new queen for 7 weeks. So those, when we made those, they were in the 3 or 4 frames of brood. And, so they have largely, I just peeked at a few this week. They're at 4.5 weeks right now. They're kind of filled when we made them into a single 8 frame deep, is say 3 or 4 frames of brood, another couple frames of food and drawn comb, and a frame or two of foundation. They've filled out that brood box. We put a super on them when we made them, just again, single brood nest. But knowing things can happen in a big way in the spring if the weather's right, we didn't want that brood nest to get too congested while there wasn't a laying queen in it. So those are looking at like they're in the box of bees, box plus of bees, but they're best case they've only had a queen laying for a week. And there's no more capped brood emerging now. There's not going to be capped brood emerging for a couple of weeks. So they had their initial hatch out of those, say a few frames of brood. That kind of fills out that box, gets some bees up into supers, but now they're kind of plateaued in their population, and I'm not expecting them to grow again until this new queen's brood starts emerging. So it also, I had some colonies where I had some swarmy colonies, and I took 2 frames of brood and bees with ripe queen cells on them and put them in a nuke box. And I said, we'll come back and look in 3 weeks. I peeked at those today, and those are like, they're not quite full in a 5-frame nuke box. They're 4 frames of bees, 3.5 frames of drawn comb. Queen probably going to start laying in the next, few days to week. So it completely depends on sort of the recipe that you made your split from. And often I know large operations, when they're splitting commercial outfits, they're kind of working backwards as far as they know they want bees of a certain size they kind of have their target dates for, okay, this is our main honey flow. We want strong colonies on June 1st. So if we're making splits, and this would be out of state, but just as an example of working the timing backwards, if they're making a split in early April, they might make it with, 3 frames of brood. By the time they get to mid-April, they might make it as 4 or 5 frames of brood. They're doing that math and that growth of that time you have to get to that essentially mature production size and it's an estimate because, weather and that all changes when things bloom. But that's kind of what we work to when we make the splits for our own bees. I don't like to split them down too small to where it's going to, by the time they recover into something that's going to, be a productive unit, it's like, well, that window's kind of closed as far as our main nectar flows. We're in this, mid-May to mid-June, even into early July with the basswood can be a really, good nectar flow for us. So we don't want to split them too small in the spring where by the time they, grow back to maturity, we've missed that window for production. So long-winded answer of it depends. But those are the things I, consider.
I think that was exactly what that question needed, because it really is a very much it depends situation. There's a question that is specifically about the Viroxan. So it says, how are you monitoring for Viroxan since it's a 45-day treatment? Are you looking for mite drops on the screen bottom board during the 45-day period? So Viroxan is I believe it's a 42 to 56-day treatment, but the thing is in the chat. But either way, it's a very long time. It's 1 to 2 months we're talking about. This time, so this is in my own hives, and which in full disclosure, there's a lot of do as I say, not as I do sometimes in my own beekeeping operation. But we have done actual field trials where we followed Viroxan and at MSU, and we haven't published the data yet. We're working with some other groups who've also studied it in small trials to see if we can do a paper together. But during that, we followed it with multiple alcohol washes to do the counts of the infestation of mites per bees. And then we also did the mite drop during that. And so this time I'm not doing it for science, I'm just doing it for using in the case that I was talking about in my own bees. So I'll do alcohol washes to make sure that my mite levels are low, but I'm not necessarily evaluating it in this context for the mite drops. There's 2 things I do want to say. One is that when we did evaluate mite drops, this is in 2023, 2 years ago, for Viroxan and Formic, one of the biggest things that I learned is just how badly infested bees are with mites. And when I do talks live, I make people guess like how many mites they think could fall out of a single hive. And we had one hive on campus that dropped over 16,000 mites during the 56 days that it was on. So that's like we went and we changed out the sticky boards underneath the hive once a week. We had people count them, and there were actually 2 hives that had over 10,000 mites. And these were completely healthy looking colonies that had just been overwintered. We did like a regular split off of them in the spring. They were just on campus and they looked healthy at that time. And we had over 10,000 mites drop off of 2 of them. So that blew my mind. So it is useful to keep monitoring The second thing is that we did get funding from Project APSM to do a large scale varroa trial. And so in May, we went out and we did half the colonies with formic acid and half of them with amitraz. And then in June, we're going to go out and we took those colonies and they're all getting split into 5 groups and we're doing 5 different miticides. And one of them is Viroxan. So I will be doing more formal studies on Viroxan. That research has 250 colonies in it. So we'll be doing more following on it in a larger scale. But in that case, we're just doing alcohol washes. And then we're also sampling the mites. We're sampling for viruses, we're doing alcohol washes, and then we're also sampling the mites to look for amitraz resistance. And then there is just one more on Viroxan, and it says, can you talk a little bit more about how you're using the Viroxan and Formic Pro in combination? So right now the label for Formic Pro says that you can't use it well. There's other miticides in the hive, but we are trying some things with that, having them in combination for science, and hopefully we'll know by next year how well that works. What I'm doing now is not in combination, but back to back. So one of the reasons I used Formic Pro early this year, like end of May, which is earlier than I normally do, is so that it gets in there for 2 weeks. Then I take those strips out and then I can put the Viroxan in afterwards. And so the idea is then that's the only thing that's in there when my honey supers are on. What we found at MSU is like if we do Formic in June, that's not necessarily enough. We'll have to do another treatment while the honey supers are on as well. So what I'm hoping is that I can do the Formic before I put a lot of supers on, take the pads off, put the Viroxan in 2 weeks later, and then let that go for 2 months and hopefully save my back and my arms and not have to do that. All right. Let's see. Dan, Zachary, you can let me know in the chat if you're still answering questions. Oh, Anna's back too.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a question and it says, can bees have mild cases of other viruses and diseases like nosema? So are all things bad or can they have mild versions of them as well?
Yes, the answer is, of course, you could always have like nosema, you could have low levels of infection, and it's not very clear what does that do to the colony at the colony level. When it's low, it might be subtle effect, so you might not be able to measure the effect, statistically, but it's we don't know if there's like an economic threshold for how many spores per bee would cause damage, for example. So yeah, that's the answer is yes, there are low levels of infection for viruses for eczema, but we don't know at the current level whether it affects your honey production or not. I would I would guess say yes. It's just sometimes maybe it's so minute that you can't measure it reliably.
All right. So there's another question about European fall brood, and it says, I had EFB this spring. I did a full shook swarm, treated with TerraPro, and burned all the EFB frames in some of the older boxes. I did save some boxes that didn't look old. What is the best way to disinfect those boxes? I used a propane torch to scorch the inside and then sanded them. Is that enough, or do I need to do more disinfecting? So the official answer is I don't know, but the real answer is probably yes, that's fine. So one thing with EFB that's different from AFB, as far as we know, is that the bacteria is in the adult bees much more. So when you're doing a shook swarm, the idea is you're taking that hive and you're shaking the bees onto new equipment. And you're getting rid of a lot of the pathogen by destroying that old equipment. So your chance of reinfection is very, very low, but it's never zero because there will be the bacteria in the bees. And the TerraPro, that style of antibiotic, only stops the bacteria during reproduction, but it doesn't like kill on site for wherever it is in the hive. So you will still have some bacteria in the hive. The goal is to have such a low amount, and so such a low amount that you're not getting the treatment doses, but then also, or the infectious dose, and then also just breaking up that exposure pathway. So the bees that are at risk are the larvae. And if you want to think about like what is the potential that a bacteria that's sitting on the wall is going to get into the mouth of a larva, it's quite low. And so, having the effort that you did on the boxes is probably sufficient. Are they going to be totally sterile with the propane torch scorch? They're not going to be totally sterile, but there's probably not that much of the Melissococcus plutoneus, the bacteria that causes it, on the walls in the first place. And then it's probably not going to be very likely to jump from the wall into the mouth of a larva. We are doing work looking at disinfectants, and it does seem that bleach does work against the bacteria, which is great. And it makes sense because it does seem like it forms a biofilm. So that's why it persists so long on equipment. So that could be another thing that you could do is spray it with bleach, but we don't have exact directions yet. We're just learning to see which ones will work on that. All right, Anna, do you want to? I know I've put you on a lot of pesticide ones, but how many verified pesticide kills are in Michigan each year, or what do we know about that?
So from talking with Department of Ag, it's not very many that get reported. I think Megan and I hear about more pesticide kills than the Department of Ag cares about. Megan, maybe you remember this, but I thought we heard that last year in 2024, there weren't any reports that made it to the Department of Ag officially. So we can check on that. That's, unless you remember off the top of your head, that's what I thought they said at one point. But either way, it's a low number that actually gets reported from what I've heard and understand.
Yeah, it's we've heard 2 reports tonight, so it's probably more than, and yeah, it is mostly just from lack of beekeeper reporting. And I guess another thing too is that we have pesticide kills, but one of the things that Anna and I talk about a lot when we do pesticide education is a lot of the damage we see is not necessarily a full kill, but just pesticide effects from chronic exposures. And that happens all the time.
And
All right.
just to go back, if you do want to report, the Department of Ag or MDARD has a specific form where you can report it, and then they have an option to report it as a honeybee kill. So that gets kind of set aside from all their other pesticide complaints.
All right. Dan, so someone tried to use, are you familiar with the OTS method for on the spot? Kind of. So I'll maybe talk about the on the spot method, and then you can maybe talk about the follow-up. So it says I tried to use the on the spot queen rearing method, but failed twice. I then took the queenless hive and combined it with the other one with the newspaper method. Is there a time when I can split this combined hive? So OTS is done by taught by a Michigan beekeeper, and it's a way that you can make increases using the hives you have and not necessarily having to do like proper queen rearing. So you kind of notch the frame of the bees of the correct age, and then you make the splits and allow the bees to raise up their own queen. And one of the things when you're doing that is it is a little less reliable than introducing a queen or introducing a queen cell. And so you do end up with some colonies that, either the cell doesn't hatch or the virgin doesn't make it back from the mating flight. So I guess if they do these recombines, what would they look for? When should they be able to split the combined hive again?
Yeah, so if you've just added a lot more space to that queen right hive by combining it, it kind of depends on how strong the parent was and how many bees were in the what you newspapered onto the top. But I would think in a week or two, especially if that's a strong colony underneath, that queen is going to appreciate that extra comb you've put on top. She's going to come up and lay into that. That's going to get, a good population of bees onto that brood. So really, as soon as just as you would look in splitting an overwintered colony, kind of be looking for some of the same signs of like you want to get it before they're getting crowded, when they're starting to get, I think 70 to 80% full on the equipment they've got. That gets them before they're getting crowded. So I would think if you've combined and give it a couple weeks to fill out some brood in that next, and that's assuming you just want to take and split two boxes apart. You can also, if you want to get into frame manipulation, you can kind of even things out. And you could do that almost any time. It's just the earlier you do it, the less overall resources you're going to split two ways. So the longer you wait, you're probably going to make a stronger split and leave a stronger parent behind. But I would think, after a week or two with that new comb on top, you probably have queens been into it for a while.
All right, so here's one that says, is there a queen producer you recommend? And my answer is yes, all of them, because you want to try them out. And honestly, the most important thing is that it works well in your area for your management technique. And I mean, that is the thing. And my favorite thing to do is to try out new queens for people and see how they're different and how they do. But a big difference between whether or not they're going to work out well for you is just like, do you keep them in two deeps? Do you want something that builds up really fast in the spring? There's just lots of different things that are just going to be preference. And then what are the diseases in your particular area? So there's no way to know ahead of time. I would say the one thing about that is, there is a lot of really good work about people breeding for traits that are good for Varroa. So VSH or things like that would be something that you could look after. Okay, Anna, this person treated hives with oxalic acid vapor once in February. If I treat with OA vapor now, must I treat once a week for 4 weeks? How do they calculate if there's two deep brood boxes or supers? Or that's their question. My thing is, or what would you recommend that this person do? Is oxalic acid vapor the thing?
Okay, great.
She leads.
Yeah. So, the hard thing about the oxalic acid vaporization or the dribble, which is the solution method, is it's only killing the varroa mites that are on adult bees. So even if you're doing it with like a lot of frequency, say every week, you're still not killing very many of the varroa mites, because when they emerge on adult bees, they're going to go back into brood cells to reproduce. And so you're only catching the mites that happen to be exposed on adult bees during the time of your treatment. And so we have other treatments that are going to kill mites kind of throughout the treatment. Formic acid is one that can kill kill mites underneath the cappings. But what I think you might be interested in is the new Viroxan oxalic acid treatment, because that is a long-lasting oxalic acid treatment. So it's active for several days. It's killing mites as they come out on adult bees that are emerging. So you're not having to reapply it, and you're still getting that mite kill from oxalic acid. So that's what we'd recommend instead. We use the oxalic acid treatment or solution method or dribble, especially when we have situations where we don't have sealed brood. So we really like it in the winter, like oftentimes November or December, because there's not capped brood. All of the varroa mites are exposed on adult bees, and so that's just a nice time to try to kill as many mites as we can. Sometimes with our spring splits or queen issues, we have these moments where there isn't capped brood in the hive, and so that's also an opportunity to use these oxalic acid vaporization or solution method. But for just normal colony management, especially spring, summer, fall, we want something that is going to be, longer lasting, or either killing mites underneath the cappings or killing them as they're emerging.
Excellent. There's one last question about the Demarest method, which I'll start with because I love using the Demarest method for swarm management. So it says, is anyone using the Demarest method for swarm management? How are you handling the supers? above the top deep or between the deeps. So with the Demarest method, it's a very nice method for managing swarming in cold areas because you kind of do your splits in 2 steps. So example here, like if you have 2 deeps, what you would do is you would take the queen and make sure she's in the bottom deep. So you could do that when you find the queen and you could put him down there and put her down there. And then, or if you can't really see her, you just shake all the bees into the bottom deep and put a queen excluder on. And then you need some space in between. And then all of the brood from the hive goes up top. And then you have options from that point. So the question here is really dealing with how much space you have in between. It says, how are you handling the supers? Is it above the top deep or between the deeps? So for me, it's between the 2 deeps. So the way that I set it up is the queen is at the bottom in a deep box. I actually give her another deep box. And in that unit, those 2 deeps, she has some food on the outside and she has plenty of room to lay. Then there's a queen excluder and then a super there that's drawn comb. And then all of the capped brood goes above it at the top. There are, like, in the official method, you can actually allow the bees to emerge out of that super and like slowly recombine. The danger with that in a lot of places in Michigan is that you're just going to end up with this monster hive that you're going to have to split again. So it maybe buys you a week, but it doesn't solve the issue. The other thing that you can do is look at allowing them to start queen cells up there and then take that box off once they've got queen cells, and then to doing a like letting them raise their queen, or you can take that box off and add a queen or things like that. So you just set it up. Really, what I'm thinking about when I'm setting it up is what is the unit that's staying with that existing queen and making sure she has lots of room to lay? And then what is the unit that I'm going to take somewhere else that really has the brood? And I'm really focusing about separating the capped brood from the queen. And so that's really like, and then I have a week where I can decide what I want to do with that top box. All right, so we're exactly at 8 o'clock. I can smell dinner cooking. We made it through all the questions. And so I think unless there's anything else that people want to add, make sure you're signed up for the newsletter so that you can get the July resources when they come out, and that you're signed up for the events. You should be now so that we can see you in the July office hours. Make sure you manage for mites really well and get those honey supers on in time to catch the flows when they start in your area. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.